Record. Yes, you are.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us for this early morning DEI and Welcomability webinar. This is one of the main downtown center's kind of avenues for quick education, a 45-minute webinar. We'll talk about our next one that's coming up at the end that will be in October, and then an in-person learning opportunity that's coming up in September. But I want to, welcome you all here. And again, if you are just joining us, feel free to share your name and community in the chat. We'll do introductions that way. My name is Sylvie Piquet, and I'm with the Main Downtown Center, along with our Senior Program Director, Ann Ball. She'll give a wave. You don't know Ann, and Perry Williams. And that is our small but mighty team. We've got other folks here from MDF as well. I think I saw Sophie and Anne and Rosie. Let me know if I'm forgetting anybody, but Main Downtown Center is part of the Main Development Foundation. It's our overseeing organization. Great, so Megan, you can pop to the next slide. The next slide is really just some Zoom tips. Of course, most of us are probably pretty familiar with it at this point, but some good reminders here. We are recording. Just in case you missed that announcement. And if you have any questions, please do use the chat function. Ann and I will be monitoring that. We will have one opportunity for a breakout room, and this will be a 45-minute webinar. So it will be pretty quick with some really high quality content that we're going to try to squeeze in there. So if you do have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, unless there's kind of a time when Delilah and Megan can kind of open it up for folks to come off microphone, but otherwise just try to keep yourself muted so we can avoid any background noise distractions. All right, and the next slide is going to thank our sponsors, which we couldn't do this without. And we especially want to thank Kennebec Savings Bank because they have provided participant stipends for communities from, let's see, Gardner, Freeport, Augusta, Brunswick, and Hallowell, thank you. And we're working on expanding that program so that there's opportunities for participant stipends for more folks. But that is kind of our entry point into trying to support folks to being here to take care of, food at this time or childcare, et cetera. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Heart of Biddeford, who is representing here with Delilah Poupore and Megan Hageney. And they have presented something, a version of this at the National Main Street Conference just this spring. And I had the pleasure of listening to it and learning a lot from it. So we're really excited that they've kind of customized it and boiled it down to something a little more bite-sized for this 45-minute webinar. But I will hand it over to the two of you.
Great. Good morning. Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for giving Megan and I an excuse to work together again. I've been at Heart of Biddeford for 12 and a half years as the executive director. And Megan, do you want to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Megan Hageney. I was the DEI fellow at Heart of Biddeford for the year of 2021 to 2022. And yeah, we're very excited to be here. Thank you so much, MDC team, for giving us this opportunity.
And for creating the DEI fellow program that you did. The Main Downtown Center got that grant and made that all possible. So a lot of this, we can keep thanking our umbrella organization, Main Development Foundation and Main Downtown Center. Thanks.
Okay.
So Megan, shall I kick in with just setting this up?
Oh, yes, please.
All right, let's do an activity to start off. You were asked to bring a piece of paper, and I'd like you to put a line down the middle. If you don't have a piece of paper, but you have some objects, you can use those instead. We're just going to ask you some questions, and if your answer is yes, put a check mark on the right side of the page. If your answer is no, put a check mark on the left side of the page, and at the end of the questions that Megan asks, you'll be able to sort of see how you did on this question. Go ahead.
Yeah. So are your meetings offered only in person or are held at a location that are inaccessible by public transit or bike? So like Delilah said, if it's yes, put a tally on the right. Do your board meetings last more than an hour and a half? Are you only meeting during traditional business hours of 9 to 5?
Board meetings only 9 to 5?
Oh, I was just meetings in general.
Thank you.
Do you require the same number of volunteer hours per month for every board member? And then similarly, do you require the same fundraising expectation from every board member? Does your current board and committee membership primarily reflect one gender, race, ethnicity, or age range? Are DEI conversations missing from your board nomination process? And so those are sets of questions. And if you could take a moment to look at your answers. So the purpose of this exercise is we say main streets, and I know folks aren't just main streets. So main streets or your organizations are fun, but these are practices and habits we practice that prevent us from engaging with everyone successfully. And so with that being said, we're going to be discussing in today's presentation DEI, what does it mean, and why is it important? And then Delilah would be going to Heart of Biddeford's journey, and then we'll consider different components of a good DEI program, and then we'll share our resources. And as we said, we'll have about 5 minutes for Q&A, and I know that's short, but if you could save your questions for that time. But we also have our contact information, so if we don't get around to everything, please feel free to reach out to us. So I like to use a dinner party analogy for this to explain DEI. So diversity is my guest list and the varieties of lived experiences around the table. Diversity has a bunch of different dimensions: age, sexual orientation, socioeconomic, religious, ethnicity, racial, so on and so forth. One I really want to highlight that I think is important for every main street is renter versus landlord, because I think Main Street should be, a central part of every affordable housing conversation in the region. And the man who's in his 50s who lives in a dual income household is always telling me that's out of scope, where when our board member who's in his 30s and has to work multiple jobs and has to have a roommate understands why we need to be talking about affordable housing. Another important aspect of diversity is race, because it really truly affects everything. With slavery, but also practices of housing discrimination and job discrimination has affected generations from building generational wealth, and it's currently affecting those, especially around wage discrimination, when a Black woman makes an average of 44 cents for every white man's dollar. And also when the color of your skin increases your likelihood of getting shot by police or your child being shot. So a huge part of this work is just naming it, and race and racism definitely are the underpin of a lot of our work. Inclusion at the dinner party is how comfortable are people feeling, and are they feeling safe and belonging? Do they feel comfortable enough to tell me their dietary restrictions or their preference for the playlist? A huge part of inclusion is symbols. So our last Pride in 2022, we put flags everywhere, and it was really sweet. One of our new residents came up and she was like, I'm new here, I identify as queer, but seeing these flags everywhere have made me feel a lot more comfortable in the city of Biddeford. And then equity is, do people have opportunities for similar outcomes regardless of individual differences? And so I'm going to dive into equity versus equality, because these two are often used interchangeably, and it's important to have these definitions straight, because one, they could generate very different results because they're very two different terms. And then two, if you use these interchangeably, you and your program lose almost all credibility. So equality is looking at the input and saying we have to treat everyone fairly. But because of individual differences and systemic differences, it has varying results. So for instance, on the left if I give everyone the same box, but like their environments are different, they can't all enjoy the game. On the right is equity. So equity kind of inverses that, and it says, how can we have everyone have the same results? So how can we make sure everyone enjoys the game? And that's looking at and addressing individual needs and systemic differences. So I'm always worried about time for these things, so I'm not going to show this clip, but this is a Friends clip of when they go out to dinner, and Joey, Phoebe, and Rachel are less socioeconomically advantaged than their friends. And in this scene, you know, they have to have like a really difficult conversation of, hey, when we split the bill fairly, it's actually not fair. Or sorry, when we split the bill evenly, it's not fair because we don't eat as much and we don't make as much as you. So yeah, equality versus equity. Oh, sorry. Okay. So business case for DEI. So I think there's a myriad of moral and ethical reasons to practice DEI. I think DEI, and we'll explain this further, brings a lot of joy to you as well, but it also just makes great business sense. I say this all the time, like Amazon and Google aren't investing millions of dollars in the program because they're good people necessarily. It's because it's great for business. So early last year, I want to say it was the Wall Street Journal and the Atlantic in the spring put out articles saying that community participation isn't all that it's cracked up to be, because it's usually the most privileged people in the room that can do a 2-hour meeting at City Hall, and then it's rampant for NIMBYism. And so what DEI does is it helps organizations, especially Main Streets, fulfill their mission, especially if we say Main Streets are for everyone. So how can we open it up where it's not just the privileged few having an impact on their downtown, but everyone being able to have that impact on their downtown? Better financials. McKinsey says those that practice DEI well often have better financials because they have better understandings of markets. So one of my side businesses is I do strategic planning for business. And I can tell you the companies that have a diversity of thought around the table oftentimes have a much better strategy, because diversity is very much linked to innovation and creative ideas, but also ground floor understanding. Funding sources value DEI. So as nonprofits, we have to be very mindful of this. Donors consider it, especially younger generations. I know when I'm donating to a nonprofit, the first thing I look at is the board and does it represent the community they're trying to serve? And then every grant I pretty much applied for in my fellowship, my work wasn't grant heavy. It was probably only like 3 or 4. DEI was always a factor to be considered in those applications. And then labor diversification. So as we saw in COVID and labor shortages, we always need to be constantly thinking about labor internally for our business at the volunteer level, because we depend so much on it as volunteers, but also in our region. And this is incredibly important because Maine has an aging population, but it also simultaneously has a problem of brain drain. So the younger generation are leaving. So diversity in DEI helps us consider other forms of labor in terms of volunteers, and again, internally, but for our economic region. And how can we attract and retain employees? Okay. Delilah. Oh, you're muted.
Megan, you just did a semester course in about 6 minutes, so well done. Thank you. We're going to bring it to the practical level a little bit, talk about Heart of Biddeford's DEI journey. Just to say, I've been in the job for 12 years here, and I definitely brought experience and a commitment to DEI into my work. And, if we had music in the park, I made sure that the performers reflected the diversity of people in Maine. When, in building relationships, it was kind of easy to build relationships with some of the churches who were already involved in the downtown, but I had to take time and build relationships with the synagogue, which is also right in the downtown, but just hadn't been involved in the center of town for a while. And then that built to like having a menorah lighting during the December. when George Floyd was murdered in 2020, I think we can all pause and remember that for a minute, and the national reckoning that grew from that. I realized that I actually didn't know if my board was fully behind me around DEI. I wanted to organize with some others a speak out protest, and I had no kind of like avenue to ask the board, is this an HIB thing or not? And it really just helped me realize that we didn't have DEI woven in. It was a little bit Delilah dependent. And because of that, being one person and just what Megan just said about diversity around the table, it was lacking in a bunch of ways. So we were able to, here's a whole list of bullets that if you want to look at the slides later, you can see it. But, you know, making a DEI statement, forming a DEI committee, onboarding the whole board, and winning some grants to do some deeper levels of training in skill building, particularly around listening and being listened to, as well as, you know, understanding terminology and what structural change means, just laying that groundwork, and then doing a pretty amazing assessment thanks to a Main Street specific DEI assessment that Megan invented, and then creating goals and having our committees set goals around DEI, and that the board votes to approve, and that it's included in our budgeting and becomes an ongoing and constantly building process. Meanwhile, continuing all the relationship building we're doing and the events, which we'll talk about a little bit more during this. On the next slide, just to show a picture of that cyclical nature of the work. Thank you. Needing that personal work, the training, like I was talking about, building champions, making sure that community members and partners are involved, getting specific with our plans, and then the key part is repeat. This is not something that happens once, and if you'd like to do a program, now we did DEI or we have a plan on a shelf, just know that it's a constantly continuing process.
Yeah, and then just to add to Delilah's point too, a lot of this DEI work is grounded in the Dr. Maya Angelou phrase of once you know better, you do better. So it's a continuing process, but constantly learning and improving on that process as well.
Thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to explore different components of a DEI program. The first one is centering relationships. So when I went to the National Main Street this year at a different DEI session, this one woman who ran a Main Street was really frustrated, where she was like, you know, I keep on having these committees and I keep on inviting the Black business owners, but they're just not engaging. I guess they're not interested. And I just want you to do like a quick role play. Like imagine you're at a gas station and someone business professional comes up to you and says, hi, my name's Megan. Please come to my home every Tuesday for the next 6 weeks for an hour and a half. And most people would say no, because if you don't have that genuine relationship and if you're not centering these relationships, it comes also as very fake and disingenuine, but it's also not safe. So it definitely made sense that those business owners weren't engaging with her or weren't committing an hour and a half of their very busy lives on a monthly basis because they didn't know her or they didn't know her Main Street. And so I think to do this, what's exciting about DEI is there's so many ways to do it, but to do the work well, you always have to center those relationships. And a huge part of that is don't talk about us without us. So we have this amazing cohort of new Mainer entrepreneurs in our town that are cooks, and they're incredible. And because they're so great, so many different nonprofits, including Heart of Biddeford, always wants to engage with them for their events. And so we were having a meeting with those nonprofit heads who 95% of them were white women. And what we kind of learned in the group is, hey, when we do focus groups, please let us know your questions so we aren't all bombarding them at once. And we want to share that space and make sure you have their questions answered as well. And it was just insane where it was just this group of white women nonprofit leaders trying to make decisions about these new Mainer culinary entrepreneurs. So there was a lot of argument about, no, they don't need stipends. No, they shouldn't be like, sorry, no, they shouldn't, they don't need, I volunteer, so they should volunteer. It's the same. And then it was also crazy decisions of like, maybe we could put them all in a schedule. Anyways, my point being is the conversation was incredibly frustrating because we were making huge decisions about these people's livelihoods and the way they engage with their community without talking to them or without having them tell us how they want to engage. And so it's just incredibly important anytime you want to work with a group of people, like if I want to work with youths, to make sure youths are around the planning table. Another huge part of this is meeting people where they are. Again, oftentimes community engagement doesn't work because there's a lot of privilege being around a decision-making table, being able to take like an hour and a half off of work, or if you don't work, have a car because public transportation in Maine is a nightmare. And so when we meet people where we are, we're more likely to engage with them and be able to hear their opinions. So for instance, last summer during my DEI fellowship, I was like, oh, we should hire high schoolers because all of the high school students tell us their social media can definitely be improved. And we'll pay them $500 for a few weeks to help us with our social media in the lead up to our big music event. And we got one participant, but and that's paying them like a considerable stipend. But when we go to where the high schoolers are, we get 20 engaged high school students. So it's always a higher success rate of meeting people in environments they're comfortable with, removing those barriers versus inviting them to our table. And another lesson from this is incrementalism. So looking back at the journey Delilah said, I think Pride is like the best example. So in 2021, Sam, the previous fellow before me, helped with Delilah and the city of Biddeford organize a Pride flag raising. And that was just incredible and monumental, especially when Biddeford is a historically working class Catholic town of a Pride flag. And then the next year, we kind of build momentum, and then we had our art walk be Pride theme, and that was an incredible event. And that's why I'm saying DEI has so much joy to it, because that was probably one of my favorite events. And then this year, and Delilah can speak more on this, and as she touched on, because it was so coalition building, everyone then felt comfortable having their own events. So in a span of 3 years, it went from a Pride flag raising to like 9 distinct Pride events throughout the city of Biddeford. And incrementalism comes into play because I think a lot of organizations wants to start at year 3, but without that trust, without that coalition, that wouldn't have been possible. And then Delilah is going to cover the remaining lessons.
Great. Under this heading of centering relationships, pacing for privilege, one of the articles Megan had brought in for us to have a discussion in the office. There are various detours that can happen in your progress. And one is like, well, we can't do that yet because everybody, kind of like quote, everybody isn't on board. And often that means like the people with the most privilege don't feel comfortable about being pushed in this area. And there is a whole lot of strategy to saying, like, let's make sure to, in a way, meet people where they are. Let's hear stories. In an early board meeting, we had people break up into dyads and share about their cultural heritage. And it was pretty neat. Like one of the, definitely the oldest white property owning person, shared about being a tough old Irishman who didn't like to talk about his feelings and stories, and the people that he shared with really enjoyed learning that from him, but if we really waited to move forward until he was ready, we would not move forward, so we had to have agreement that we were doing this based on agreed upon values, and that we would keep moving forward, and where there was discomfort, there'd be opportunity for conversation, but that's not the same as saying the train isn't moving, the train is moving forward. And, not everybody stays on the train. And that's something you can say with volunteerism. I'm just thinking of some of the people in here who only work with like paid staff instead of with volunteers. And so it's a trickier job in a way where you're saying this train is moving forward. And if you want to keep working at this place, you got to get on the train. That is has different challenges, but just keeping in mind where conversations start to get off track because, well, I'm not sure X person, is going to be ready for this. Another lesson is around executive sponsorship, mostly meaning you do need a champion willing to say, I support DEI efforts. I'm willing to step out. You don't want to step out alone. You want to have supporters and champions with you. But, an opportunity arose. Main Street, the National, offered a grant for creative responses to COVID. And there wasn't really anything in there about DEI necessarily, but I had been reading a lot about how in Maine, COVID had a disparate impact on Black people, on Black-owned businesses. So I suggested that we use that $8,000 in grant fund to address the disparate impact of COVID on Black business owners. And they said, yes, let's fund that. And so we were able to use that $8,000 to build more relationships with the 5 Black business owners in downtown Biddeford and do a marketing campaign. And now there's a spot on our website about Black-owned businesses, and certainly built a strong relationship with a statewide organization called Black-owned Maine. It's great to be able to come to that table with some money too. Like Rose, who runs Black-owned Maine, probably has a request twice a day from people who want to meet with her and pick her brain or something. So it was great to be able to say, I'd like to meet with you and tell you about some money we have. And she was into that. But it was, taking the step, taking the leadership, being willing to step out and to say to the board, here's an opportunity that I want us to do.
Yeah. So just to add to that too, with executive sponsorship, yeah, it's incredibly important as a leader within your organization or your company, you set the tone. And I have a friend that works at a Big 4 and she's a woman of color. And it just stinks. Harvard actually calls it like non-promotable tasks, where she's working on our DI committee, she's doing a bunch of work, and it just stinks because it's distracting her from work that will actually help her get a promotion, but also her boss doesn't support it. So if there isn't that leadership support, it completely undermines all the work. So now we're going to shift to tools. So we kind of tried to structure this components as like our lessons and then things you can take away or actionable next steps. So this one's pretty simple. It's just demographic comparisons. So looking at your footprint and then looking at the decision makers or your board or your committees and saying, where are the discrepancies? And so I know often with Delilah saying with pushback, this is quantitative data. And so it's really hard to push back against. So when we were generating support for DEI at Heart of Biddeford, one of our big things was, hey, the average age of our downtown is 29. We are very fortunate. We have one of the youngest downtowns in Maine. Yet the average age of our board members for women was in their 40s, for men was in their 50s. And so being able to black and white state that and saying, here's hard proof that we aren't reflecting our community as well as we need to, definitely generated a lot of support and helped heavily influence our board recruitment. And then Delilah is going to introduce us to dyads.
Great. When we did the round, it was actually 3 different trainings with an organization called Luna Jimenez, that's Nancy Luna Jimenez, Seminars Logist. I've lost it, but it's in the back of our program. A big piece was her idea that in order to build authentic relationships, we need to listen to one another and be listened to. Like the example I told you with the Irish heritage guy, that a lot of times it's not so much that we need to go out and listen to others, but we need to have a chance to be listened to. And that's where we kind of have a little bit softer sense of who we are and where our, like faults are or where our strengths are. And then it actually makes us better listeners. And we learned this tool, dyads, where when one person is talking, the other person's only job is to listen. And then we switch and the second person gets a chance to talk, not about what the other person just said and not to say, oh my God, thanks for talking about that. And here's some advice. No, it's like your turn to talk and explore. What did somebody call it? Constructivist listening. You get to construct your own thoughts around it. And so we're going to do a really very short version of it, but just a chance to sort of have a little taste as well as switch the pace of our presentation where you get to talk for a minute. So Megan, do you think 3 minutes would be, we've got 3 total minutes right now with our timing? Okay,
And
great.
Sylvie, this is where we're going to do the breakout room.
Great. Perry is ready to do those for folks in pairs.
Yeah, could you exclude me from the breakout room?
Yep, we'll exclude you and Delilah.
Thank you. And actually, sorry, let's make it 2 minutes. I just took a look at the time.
That's okay. You
So
got that, Perry? 2 minutes?
So you're each going to have 1 minute, use a timer or just watch the little time clock on there and try to be crisp at that 1 minute mark and say, now you go. And the prompt question is, when did you realize DEI was important to you? And you can be silent. Maybe you're silent for 48 seconds and then you're like, oh yeah, here's the thought. And you get 12 seconds to say it.
Yeah, and then whoever has the most number of siblings go first.
Perfect. Ready when you are, Perry.
Room should be open and timer is going.
It's going to be very short for people who are just getting into.
Rosie, I did not see that you said to not put you into a room, and now I think somebody's in a room by themselves. Mia is.
Want to go join her?
Let's see. I don't know if I can add someone.
Perry, I'm going to join. I'm going to join Mia.
Okay.
Oh, it looks like Rosie got in there, but
Oh, great.
I'll join just to make sure.
Nothing like the breakouts under pressure. Megan, with our 45 seconds, how do you think we?
Yeah, that was a fast 35 minutes.
You did so well. You were so fast, but it just takes time.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we're just gonna have to speed through like the third one.
Great. It might just be a like showing
Rosie.
the page, basically.
Rosie and Mia were good, FYI.
Okay. Delilah, should we skip through our 30-second pause?
Yeah, maybe it's just like an inhale and an exhale instead.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
All right, everybody should be coming back in 10 seconds.
Thanks for organizing that.
Work.
Are you're gonna take it from here, Megan, or do you want me to? Great.
Awesome. Well, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to go at a very brisk pace because we have about 10 minutes left. So this is the welcomability matrix. I developed it with Chloe Hepburn, who was also a fellow at the Westbrook Main Street. This is just a great tool to say, hey, I don't have a relationship with this group or this organization. You know, in sales, half the work is just getting in the room. And it engages people in different ways to hear about their thoughts and what they think can be improved on their downtown and what they really like about it. I just have to give a quick disclaimer on this though. I did about 5 to help inform our DEI plan, and 80% of them went off the rails because, but that's also really exciting. And that's how we got like that second rendition of Pride around this, is because we were with a group of queer identifying people in Biddeford, and they were like, no, I feel safe. Can we talk about how we could celebrate Pride this upcoming month? And so it's really exciting to see the work. It's always something really unexpected, but fun working with this. And so we're not going to take a 30-second break. We're just going to take a quick breather in and out. I just want to take a moment to, when I often talk about DEI efforts, leaders are like, I can't even start because I don't have a DEI committee. And so I just want us to ground ourselves in the next few sections where there's a lot of work you can do, and then to reflect on how can I foster these relationships that, like we said, are incredibly important without exploiting them. So this is, the other one's kind of qualitative, this is quantitative. So how can I make sure I'm doing work and, not making bubbles, but actually swimming laps? And a huge part of that is Dr. Inbermex Kendi focus on outcome advocacy versus feeling advocacy. We have a group in our downtown that meets once a week or once every other week now. And it's one of the most frustrating nonprofit groups because they just talk and it's like nothing ever comes from these discussions. And so I think it's really important to always evaluate, have a plan, implement the process, capture data, and repeat. Another important thing around this is make sure the work is bolted in and not bolted on. And Delilah has a great story for this.
Just a cultural organization locally was interested in Native history and decided to have a statue made. And then later said, I think because of enough of us wrote notes to them to go talk to Native people. And basically they were at that point trying to like get the okay of Native people for the project that the white people had thought up. So how do you start at the relationship building? What are the interests of that group, backing that group, as opposed to like, I've got an idea for you,
Yeah. Another part of this too is airplane energy. A lot of my conversations are like, we don't have the resources right now to create a whole new DEI program. But I think what works incredibly well is just looking at your existing program and then shifting it a little bit. So the airplane analogy is if I'm taking off and I shift my plane just 2 degrees, I'm ending up in a completely different destination. So looking at existing stuff and then framing it for DEI, I think is incredibly helpful. And then this is where systems come into play. My dad made me read Atomic Habits, and it's a great book, but a huge part of it is like, hey, put in structures and habits, because if you wait till you feel like it, you're just going to do the work inconsistently. And that's especially true with DEI, because again, there's a lot of joy, but there's a lot of discomfort with it. And I think the discomfort is essential, and those in conversations are essential. So structuring it within your organization, so you do it when you need to do it versus when you feel like it. So Delilah referred to Grosky earlier with Pacing for Privilege, the articles at the end, it's incredible. And 2 things to lean into the discomforts around is celebrating diversity. So making sure when you celebrate it, which is fantastic, also do programming to address how oftentimes those differences as well cause discrimination. Sorry, I know we're going very fast paced, but we'll go into tools to see how you could structure this already in existing programming or habits. 2 things we don't have slides on are transformation strategies. So Main Streets, I'm not sure if your Main Street does this, but have like transformation strategies or strategic planning for the upcoming year. And one thing that we did that was just really helpful visually is just having a column that's just for DEI. So it's like, we want to have activity-based businesses, and then a column being like, how can we make this a DEI shift or a DEI focus? Another one is assessments. Delilah touched on this earlier, but we create assessments around the 4 points of the Main Street. And so that's very helpful. And then we do it on an annual basis now. And so benchmarking where we progressed and where there's improvement still. And so equity pause, this is one of my favorite tools, and it can be implemented right away. So the purpose of equity pause is just having a break on your board meeting, on any of your agendas, in your weekly meetups, to see, just ask ourselves DEI questions and remind ourselves of practices. And so sample questions are on the right. But what's really helpful around this is studies have shown that when people bring up DEI, it actually makes them a lot less unlikable. Like, it's really hard to bring up. It's really easy to dismiss. And so this holds a safe space to have those very important conversations.
Great. Another tool is our DEI event checklist, and it's at that link. You can, while you're doing event planning, go through the checklist, see how you're doing. It relates to all kinds of events, so maybe only 30% of the questions will pertain to your particular event. And then afterwards, do an after event evaluation. How well did we do? And you know, unless you have an unlimited budget, it's not possible to do the entire checklist for every event, probably. But if you pick areas to make progress on around each event, it grows. And then you also see opportunities for, like, oh, a grant just came up related to translation services, and that's one of our goals we're hoping to do. So you can apply for the grant knowing it fits your event checklist.
We will send out that link in the follow-up if you didn't snag it here.
Yeah. And then we could send the slides too, which are currently frozen.
Oh,
Okay. So the last thing is sharing resources. So oftentimes I think organizations, especially Main Streets, forget how much power they hold and how much equity they can actually share. And so this is a helpful reminder of, are we walking the walk and talking the talk? So for instance, we had a holiday event during my fellowship, and we absolutely mindedly bought like 15 raffle prizes from Target. And in retrospect, it's like, we easily could have bought that from like 5 different stores on our Main Street. And so we're always telling people to buy local, but are we actually buying local? And so a way to do that on a more official level is a financial analysis. And this is inspired by the 15% pledge, a Black-owned nonprofit in New York. And sorry, I forgot to mention earlier in this program, so much of this work was inspired by women of color, especially Black women. And we made sure to include that in all our resources. But the purpose of this program, and they work with like Sephora, but this could easily be adopted at any Main Street, is 15% of our budget. Are they going to businesses of color or minority-owned businesses? And I think that's incredibly impactful, because say if you're $100,000 budget, $15,000 in your Main Street, which you're investing, is huge. Another thing really fast is sharing the stage. One of Main Street's superpowers, and you'll do this better than most organizations within your region, is you can bring people together like no other. And a huge part of this is a lot of folks have like weekly or monthly music events, especially in the summer. One thing that we did, and it didn't cost us really anything, is we have this literal platform, the stage, and then we used it in the past and are currently using it to just, when people in our area have important social causes, like we partnered last summer with the Climate Action Task Force. Hey, do you just want to spend 5 minutes at our existing event and promote your event? And it was cool because they brought in a bunch of other people doing similar work. It really didn't cost us anything, but it was a way that we could promote to 100 local residents this important cause that's affecting them. And then Delilah, if you want to share Making Connections.
Since we're over the time, do you want to just show skip to the last screen?
Yeah, and so we'll share all these slides, but again, this is like actually, all these are women of color. They do incredible work. Highly recommend, especially Equity in the Center does a weekly newsletter, or sorry, I think it's now bi-weekly, and it's the best one, and it's insane that it's free. Cool. And so I know we're over time, and we apologize for that, but yeah, thank you again, MDF and MDC, for this opportunity.
Megan and Delilah, thank you both so much. This was, we know this is a huge topic. The fact that we asked you to try to boil some things down into 45 minutes was really impressive. And we want to acknowledge, just all of you for showing up today. Thank you for taking this time. This is, of course, barely scratching the surface and is not even, a full start to DEI work. It's a really long journey, but continuing to have these conversations as well as looking for then the outcome advocacy. That was a takeaway of mine. Trying to apply this work is really critical. So the Maine Downtown Center is committed to continuing these conversations and looking for different outcomes and how we can share that with our communities. So we are committed to continuing this work and appreciate having you all with us. We are going to follow up with the recording, all of these resources, their slides, contact information for Delilah and Megan. That's okay. I think they've mentioned that is. And so you can reach out with questions. Please do continue the conversation, and hopefully you were able to grab a nugget or two from today to start to put into your work this week. Have a conversation with somebody about it. So thank you so much. And you can look out for our upcoming webinars. Inclusivity and accessibility is October 12th. And then we'll have a a Downtown Institute, which we often say DI, Downtown Institute on Downtown Planning, that's coming up in September. And that's a 3-hour in-person. But again, thank you all so much for joining us, and hope you have a great day. Thanks, Delilah. Thanks, Megan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks,